without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this, the history of our area. And I couldn't start a presentation about winter memories in Harbor Springs without touching on our natural history and some of that past. So we're not going to stay in the Ice Age for very long, but we're starting in the Ice Age, starting with the glaciers. So about 12,000 years ago or so, the glaciers in our area sort of finally started to retreat. The Laurentide ice sheet was retreating out of our area. And as it retreated, it began to carve all of the distinctive shapes that we know today as the Peninsula of Michigan, all of our lakes. And those glaciers are also responsible for our deep natural harbor and for the bluff on 3rd Street behind me here, and for our ski hills. And so the local ski hills are what are called moraines, which are deposits of sand, dirt, clay, stones that are left behind as the glacier retreats. And those tall hills are those glacial moraines, as they're called. So that's the natural history, the icy past of our area. These two images that I have on the screen here are just two of the many that are in our collection here at the Historical Society that we preserve. There's a lift at Nubbs Knob on the left, and then this is Reuben Hildebrandt and Doug Hill ice fishing on the harbor in about 1952 is the date on that one, which I just think is a fantastic picture. So that's a little bit of the natural history, and now we're getting into the uh, history, I suppose you could say. Now, we live in what I would call a naturally cold climate here. Our winters can stretch on for what seems maybe like forever, even when they're mild like this. And it's not surprising, or it shouldn't be surprising, that winter sports developed in our area on Little Traverse Bay. It can be a little surprising sometimes to think of people in the past engaging in some of these recreations that we do today. You might not think that the Victorians ice skated, but they sure did. So I love this image of the Victorians in their really fantastic outfits with their fur muffs, just having a grand old time on the ice, because it really was something that was incredibly popular at the time. There were ice skating rinks, there were toboggan runs, all of those sorts of winter outdoor activities were becoming very popular leisure activities, especially in the Victorian era. I love this woman here is being pushed in this sort of seated sled by someone else on skates. She must not have trusted herself too much on the skates. And this gentleman back here has clearly fallen right down. These are just two examples of some old ice skates that you just strapped onto the bottom of your shoes. And of course, as a resort area ourselves and as, a community that is naturally icy, we had a lot of those sports and leisure activities developing here in Harbor Springs. So, uh, as I like to say, we're fully committed to winter sports from the 1880s until now. But this is when you start seeing it crop up in newspapers. So these are ice skating newspaper clippings. I'm just going to read a few of them to you. And this one here is Charles Werner proposes to supply our citizens with an opportunity to enjoy skating all winter long. He's arranged to keep a rink on the harbor in front of the Perry House. Otto Gix is fixing up a place on the harbor for a skating rink and had the fire engine out yesterday flooding the ice, which I thought was very fun. That's 1886. This article from 1882 is all about Henry O'Connor's skating rink that is opening with an exhibition of ground and lofty tumbling. So they had some figure skaters out there. There were champion skaters of Petoskey that were there, and unfortunately, they weren't able to come. It's a very long article, but I I enjoy they mentioned that the newspaper writers themselves were present, hoping that some fellow would break his neck and make an item, a news item, I assume, that they could then report about. Becoming interested at last, we girded on a pair of tracks and sailed forth. The result was a surprise and a delight. The surprise was ours, and the delight was all on the part of the spectators. So I love those cute little newspaper clippings there about a skating rink. So ice skating rinks were very popular. They were all over the harbor, but they were also in other places. For example, there was one behind the high school here in Harbor Springs for many, many years, and at Kiwanis Park, and in some other locations as well. All right. So ice skating was certainly not the only leisure activity or recreation that the Victorians were interested in when it came to sort of snow or winter sports. These are some newspaper clippings from 1885 and 1886, respectively, um, talking about tobogganing. Um, the young American male and female indulges in this. A slippery path has been worn down the bluff leading to the schoolhouse, and the girls and boys ranged from 5 to 12 years old come sailing down the almost perpendicular incline like meteors, in some instances turning over and over before reaching the bottom. The fun for the boys and the girls is assured, but we wouldn't care to do the patching in the families. So, if you imagine the bluff behind us and how icy the roads get, apparently in 1885, because the school here in Harbor Springs, the high school and the public school, was built on the bluff by about 1878, roughly in the location where the current high school is. So it was up on top of the bluff there, and apparently the kids took to sailing down the almost perpendicular incline like meteors, which just sounds fun, but I don't think I'd want to try it. In 1886, it mentions that tobogganing is as much the rage in Michigan towns and villages as roller skating was a time back. That's an interesting way to put it because it's almost like ice skating and roller skating is old hat at this point. But of course, we just saw some newspaper clippings that talk about how it was moving on, how it was still very popular in our area. It is worth noting that roller skating was also coming into vogue during that late Victorian era and was another of those very popular pastimes. So, of course, it translated very well to ice skating. Speaking of toboggans, um, it's in 1929 that we get these sort of the first mentions of these huge bobsleds in Harbor Springs. Now, in this image, you can see there's actually two bobsleds here, one on either side, being pulled behind a car, and that is actually Olaf Sorensen's 1929 Model A Ford. Now, they pulled them all the way up East Hill, which is now 131, and North Hill, which is Hoyt. And those were the hills that were used for bobsledding during the Depression sort of era, and a little bit later. Apparently, they tried Judd Hill, but the turn right near 3rd Street was a little too severe and too sharp for the bobsleds, especially those long bobsleds. You can see how many people they managed to stack on the end and get everyone on there. We have a lovely oral history in our archives from Joe Jewellerette. It was recorded in 1991. And he talks about this sledding and he says, so what we did was the town started at the top of East Hill, about where the care center is, Bay Bluffs, and they took a channel 4 foot wide on the side of the road and they iced it, clear until it come right down to the corner, right down State Street. They iced it. So what you would do is you would get on this big bobsled. They would pull you up by truck, Model Ts or whatever, and clear up to the top of East Hill. You would get on the bobsled and then you would go dashing down. You sometimes would go over on Kilbourne's yard on Harbor Point and turn around before your sleigh would get stopped. So I love that little oral history that we have there from Joel Jollerette actually on these slides. And we actually do have something even more special than that. So Pierpont Productions has taken from the collection of the Little Traverse Museum across the way in Petoskey there some film footage that was recorded in 1929 of these bobsleds. And they were able to convert that to a digital form. So our extreme thanks to Pierpont Productions for that. And it means that I actually am able to share this with you. Let me get the right frame. I'm trying to put it in the frame for you there. Okay. Hopefully you're all seeing that pretty well. And I'm going to go ahead and play some of this for you. There's no sound with the video, so I might provide a little bit of commentary. This is ski joring and coasting on Main Street. Now, ski joring is when you attach a rope to the back of a horse and you hold on and you ski down Main Street. Occasionally, they did it with cars as well. It looks fun, if a little bit yeah, dangerous maybe is the way I would put that. But there they go, sailing down Main Street. Now here's those bobsleds, and this is I'm gonna pause it for a second because this is that exact picture that we just saw from 1929. So seeing that in this footage was pretty extraordinary. So this is that Model A of Olaf Sorensen getting ready to be pulled up the East Hill. There they go. Sorry, pause one more time for you. This building here, if you can see it, this is the library on one side and what is now Kelbel Pharmacy, which was Hovey's, and before that it was C.D. Lane. And you can also see the Methodist Church here and the building I'm in right here, the History Museum. So it's fun to sort of pause these and get a feel for what's happening in some of these videos. And so it's difficult to see at first here, but coming down East Hill, that toboggan's gonna go right in front of the camera here in a second, you'll see. And it's moving at a pretty good clip. You'll see as they go past, waving to the camera. There they're coming again. And so that's that 4 foot wide track on the side of the road that Jojo Lorette was talking about, that they specifically iced for this toboggan run so that it would stay kind of in that track coming down East Hill and wouldn't, sort of slide off onto another part of the road. And here they are, coming up on, is that Spring Street there by the library? Going right on past. Here they come again. And you can see them right there heading on down. It looks like they managed to managing to stop before they get too far. And there's just maybe one more before I'm gonna stop it for us here. We'll see a tiny bit more footage in a moment, but there they go. That's quite fast. That's quite a clip. Oh, this was the other part of the footage that I am gonna let play. This is ski joring again on Little Traverse Bay on our harbor, being pulled behind cars. I mean, this looks so unsafe. I can't even imagine. And after watching this a couple times, you notice a few people that end up bailing themselves out. Okay, we're gonna pause that there and come back to my presentation. But that's fun. Isn't that fantastic? Again, we can't thank Pure Pop Productions enough for first managing to get that footage onto a digital format and sharing it with us. Apparently, there was some sort of unprecedented, exceptional snowfall in 1929 because there's a lot of mentions of it. These are a few sort of candid shots from the yearbook that year, showing off some fun frolicking in the snow. These are also some scenes from 1929 specifically. That's Alton Campbell in the top left there. This photograph itself with the car on Harbor Springs Petoskey Road, actually, which is 119 right by Petoskey Brewing now. It's actually labeled the Big Snow of 1929. And then here is the Hollywood gas station, which is now Johann's on the corner there. I also thought I would share this lovely image of an early horse-powered snowplow. This is from the early 1920s, maybe even late 19-teens. You can see the bank building here in the background. So this would be Graham's and then moving on up. Um, I love this picture. One, because it shows just a beautiful stretch of downtown Main Street, but also because look how many horses they have powering this snowplow to break through that snow. I just think it's pretty fantastic. So, we're gonna hop back to the video. We're doing some hopping around here. This, again, is that exact picture. Here he is on the top of the car. And if we come back to the video, there he is. Again, this is the big snowfall of 1929, just showing off how much snow there really was. And this is showing some of their snow plowing efforts. And I will note that it's not my screen that's cut off. It's the video doesn't go up that high, just in case you were wondering. This is a slightly more high tech than the horses, but you can see that they are still struggling to get through all of that snow. Um, I believe this is still 1929, but I could be wrong. And this um, whoop, is going to pause because we're going to come back to it. We're going to come back to it in just a minute. I wanted to share a few other things with you first. Road plowing, either with horses or modern machinery, wasn't the only sort of service that the city of Harbor Springs had to provide. The village also had to maintain the water system. And prior to 1911, 1910, when Ephraim Shea sold his water system to the city, so prior to 1910, it was Ephraim Shea's responsibility and all of his employees to keep the pipes from freezing. And when they did freeze, this was a mobile warming hut that they used to thaw out frozen water pipes and mains, which, again, is just really fascinating. We have a couple of these pictures, and this one is actually labeled. So this is Pat McCarty on the left, and Ed Bradfield here on the right is what it is labeled, circa 1900 or so. Here in Harbor Springs. I love this picture. Again, because you get a really fantastic view of Main Street and you can see furniture and undertaking here at this store. And you can see some of these iconic buildings that help you place where you are. So again, this is my building. This is the Harbor Springs History Museum. The Methodist Church is here and it's in its previous incarnation before it was the brick building. And the Republican printing office was shortly thereafter. So this was the mobile warming hut, and here's a second picture of it, of them thawing out frozen pipes in the wintertime. I love this picture because the horse has his head sticking inside the warming hut, because apparently it was warm in there. And there's this lovely lady looking out the window as well. So I'm not super sure how this all worked, but there's pipes and everything's connected, and they've clearly dug down to the pipes themselves. And again, this is around circa 1900 when they were working on thawing out those pipes. So, moving back to bobsledding, we're backtracking a little bit. We saw those bobsledding pictures and the video 1929 or so. The sport itself fell out of favor for just a few years. After that, it's like 33, 34. It wasn't super popular. And then it came back, it was revived, and the slide was moved to Bull Moose Hill. Now, as a sort of side note, there was a winter sports park just outside of town, um, potentially off Ridge Road, where we're not super sure from the newspaper clippings, where residents could sled and skate and enjoy sort of those winter sports, but it wasn't an official park, and it was more of a convenient farm where people could gather. It wasn't an official Harbor Springs park. Again, there was also an ice rink behind the high school. Now, it was through the efforts of the Harbor Springs Winter Sports Club that sledding on Bull Moose Hill was established. And so these are just some newspaper clippings from that time, starting in 1935. This one is a call for volunteers to construct the banks, with Howard and Bob Armstrong and Mark Graham supervising. And it's inviting people to get out and dig. A great deal of manual labor is involved in constructing the harbor bobsled slide. Most of this is involved in constructing and tamping down the high protecting banks, which make a safe ride at high speed possible. So it's a call to the citizens to come out and help them. And as we had mentioned when you saw the video of them bobsledding down Main Street off East Hill, there were no banks. And so it would have been very easy for that bobsled to just jump out of its track and mow people down. And so they were attempting to prevent that in this new incarnation. Here in 1936, coasting proves a popular sport at the Winter Sports Park, a few miles west of town. Again, that's the park that is not really an official park, but a place where you could gather. And then the Winter Sports Club is being suggested to be formed here. Now, in 1937, the club did include Howard Armstrong as the club president, Leo Cassidy as the treasurer, and Reverend Ralph Young as the secretary. And the Winter Sports Park in Petoskey, of course, gets a lot of attention, and there's a long history of winter carnivals in Petoskey that we won't go into. But for a while there, Petoskey was where all the Harbor Springs people went as well, and our bobsled slide down Bull Moose Hill was abandoned, probably because honestly, it just took a lot of work. But about 10 years later, in 1948, again, they revived the tradition of bobsledding. There's a new club, their winter club, led by A.J. Zuber. We're working again to recreate that same bobsled run, and they wanted to use Bull Moose Hill as well. They actually got the city council to approve lighting on Bull Moose Hill and helping them construct the slide. So the slide for bobsledding would begin at the Harbor Point Golf Course and run. It was about a mile into town, with experienced drivers leading each sled. And so it wasn't a free-for-all anymore. You had an experienced driver at the front of that toboggan leading you down the hill. The Chamber of Commerce got involved, the American Legion got involved, and several of those old, from the 1920s, 1930s, 20-person bobsleds were located and reconditioned for use. And so that's what this newspaper article is basically saying, talking about where the course will begin, when it will end, and that they're going to begin construction of the slide as soon as it is cold enough to lay down the ice track. So that revival in 1948 was captured, especially by our own well-known photographer, Virgil Haynes, who arrived here in 47 and started taking pictures. And you can see the hills that the ramps, I should say, the banks that they had constructed. And the experienced bobsled drivers, in this case, Bob Lauer, Walter Cook, Judd Smith, Ward Wallstrom, Kenneth Pfeiffer, and Pete Wilson. Dale Angel, a novice at bobsled driving, made one trip down with a load. He's being tutored for future runs, which I thought was pretty fantastic. Apparently, Garstrang Farm, which is now Birchwood Farm, donated to the Winter Sports Club a 1,000-gallon water tank that they used to spray down this track in order to make it more feasible for running. Now, in the Historical Society's collection, we actually still have one of these bobsleds, and the only place it fits is in one of our stairwells, going the entire length of the stairwell. I don't think I would be brave enough to do this. There were certainly not there were some serious injuries, but there weren't there were quite a number of scrapes that you could say. moving from tobogganing to ice boating. Now, again, we have a really fantastic presentation coming up with Dick Babcock and Gretchen Dorian, all about ice boating. That'll cover some of this history and then go into modern day. But I'm covering just a tiny bit of it here, not a ton. Um, but as with many of the other sports that we mentioned, ice skating, tobogganing, and sledding, ice boating was popular in the Victorian era and up through even the present day. But these are two images of some of those very early ice boats.
Wait,
I love the hat there. I think that's pretty fantastic. Um, and these are the Slowpoke and the Bluebird, are two different ice boats here in Harbor Springs. They're pretty fantastic pictures. And once more, we're going back to that fantastic video because there's a few images here um, of ice boating. So we see it's still popular by 1929. There they go, zipping along. You have to have certain ice conditions and clarity in order to make this work, but they seem to be doing quite well. And that's almost less of an ice boat and more of an ice sail, an individual. There he is, almost a kite, and he's just on skates, propelling himself that way. So I thought that was pretty fun too. Unfortunately, that's the end of this video, um, but we have some footage from one other video here in just a minute. So again, that's all I'm going to say on ice boating because I really encourage you to come back on February 13th. Again, that lecture is at the History Museum itself, and so we encourage you to sign up for that on our webpage and join us. One of the final things that I wanted to talk about during this presentation was the ice harvest. So ice itself was not just for recreation, of course. It had an incredibly important purpose. In order to preserve food and keep food through the long, hot summer months, you needed ice. And you stocked those ice boxes using ice from the harbor. And this is a really fantastic image of an early ice crew filling one of the warehouses just underneath the hill here. And we have some other fantastic images too. There were many, many ice harvesting companies that got out there just as soon as they could, and they supplied ice for the entire region. We think this image is of the Knickerbocker Company, but we're not positive. Here's some more images and some newspaper clippings, and you can see these are really just I don't want to say ramshackle, but they're just sort of thrown together wooden sides and wooden structures that they stacked the ice in and then covered with straw. And there were many of these sort of huge warehouses of ice just lined up along the shoreline um, during the winter, and slowly the community would go through them. So again, here's some fun newspaper articles from the 1890 Daily Resorter, our daily summer newspaper. It says the Knickerbocker Ice Company of Cleveland is taking about 25 carloads of ice per day out of their ice houses here, and up to this time, not 1/3 of Harbor Springs ice has been removed. Considering the fact that the ice trade will last not more than 60 days longer, it appears that several ice houses may not be opened this summer. Nearly all the ice from here goes to Cleveland, which I thought was sort of fascinating. So they loaded up on rail cars and took it all across the country. There's another fantastic little newspaper clipping here that mentions that the Knickerbocker Company has 20 large ice houses on the shore of the harbor, which are filled with the purest spring water ice, aggregating over 5,000 tons. So again, this was a big business and a big industry, and the reason was this. Here are two examples of early ice boxes. from around the 1890s. Obviously, one is much more elaborate than the other, but the idea behind it is the same. You put a giant block of ice in there, and it keeps the rest of your food cold and refrigerated. I enjoy this. This is an ad from our local newspapers here. One is from EHF Barnefiner's Natural Ice. Bulk cracked cubes are shaved. And then Guy Ingalls also had an ice business here in Harbor Springs. Quite a few people did. And this was a fantastic image just showing how the air circulated and worked in a refrigerator, in an ice box of the era. And there were specific guidelines from the government about what you should store in which portions of the ice box, depending on how close they were to that block of ice and the temperatures that it kept things, because it varied depending on which container you were in. I love these. This is some wartime advertisements talking about how to safely store your food in this is about the 1920s or so. At the right, these are some ice women during World War One. One of the many jobs that was originally done by men that during the First Great War were taken over by women, was delivering these huge chunks of ice to your home. You'd get a weekly delivery of the ice. And again, depending on where you put the ice and whether you wrapped your ice or not, it would change the temperature of where things were. And so if your ice was wrapped or not wrapped, you saved money and you wasted less ice. Now, harvesting that ice is something that continued into the 1950s. 1952 is usually when I get to some of the end of some of the ice cutting. By this time, many people had electric refrigerators in their homes, and I was talking with a local lady, Ann Wildrum, who was telling me that there was one winter when the ice didn't freeze, and because of that, everyone had to go out and buy an electric refrigerator. And apparently, Squire Electric made their fortune that winter when the ice didn't come in. So we have again from Pierpont Productions some fantastic images of ice harvesting on Little Traverse Bay right in this 1950 era. So let me pull that up so that you can see it. Again, it's only about 2 minutes long, but I will let it play and let you see it. There he's cutting the ice. And we have a few of these tools, these ice harvesting tools in our collection here at the Historical Society. And ice harvesting and the techniques for doing it certainly didn't change much from the turn of the century up until the 1950s. It really was a very similar process. That image we saw from the 1890s had one of these exact sort of conveyors that conveyed the blocks of ice upwards and into, in this case, into a truck that took them elsewhere. And sometimes it would take them up directly into the ice house itself. Coming in. And these ice harvesting fields and area was just in front of, um, sort of near the bank area on the harbor there. And again, this is one of those ice houses, this wooden, sort of really simple wooden structure that you start loading up with ice right on the dock there. And this is how you get all of that ice neatly formed up. And if you can imagine 20 of these ice houses along the shoreline at its heyday, that is a lot of ice. And that was a lot of work to harvest all that ice. And then the final bit of this clip is showing um, uh, cutting through the ice, not with a saw, but with a mechanical uh, cutter there. And again, when the ice didn't freeze, that's when you had a problem. There's one of the big saws being used to cut the ice into smaller pieces and to different chunks in that ice field there. And that's the end of that video. So again, we're very grateful to have those videos. Here's a fantastic image from a little bit later, 1961. Midge Leonard, Ty Miller, and Vincent Cooper are shown there with their implements, which again, I think is fantastic. We can't mention being out on the ice on the harbor without talking a little bit about ice fishing. This is a postcard from the 1930s, 40s or so, showing a northern Michigan ice village when everyone would take their ice shanties out onto the ice. Now, this is a winter tradition that is, if not hundreds, thousands of years old. At the turn of the century, this, of course, wasn't just an activity for sports fishermen. This was an essential winter food source for many people. And it was another way for many locals to earn incomes as well. And in some years, when the ice failed, it could be devastating to some local families. And into the 1950s, there were still these huge conglomerations of ice shanties on Little Traverse Bay. As soon as the ice was thick enough to allow it, you would have people out there. Um, and these are just some images here. I don't know how to make that annotate go away. That's weird. This here is from 1915, and it says quite a number of unemployed of Petoskey and a number of others who enjoy the sport have either erected their fish shanties or are getting ready to do so in preparation for the annual ice fishing campaign on Little Traverse Bay. And then 1932, we have another little newspaper clipping just about ice fishing in general and talking about ice fishing in the past and how important it was for the Odawa here, as well as other locals, to be able to fish. Some more fun images, some Virgil Haynes images again. This is Leslie Helping and his son Donald in about February of 1952. You can see their ice shanty there and town in the background. The high school is very prominent up on the hill there. And here, a Chamber of Commerce sponsored event. We have some well-known names there: Floyd Hoover, Steve Graham, Lloyd Taylor, and Harold Hahn. And let's see, we're just about done. We're wrapping up with talking about the community Christmas tree. And this is something that I wonder, if you weren't born and raised here in Harbor Springs, maybe you don't realize how special this is. But I have only been here about 13 years or so, and um, this is truly special, and it's something that's been going on since 1915. And so this year, 2025, is going to be, um, if I can do math, 110 years that we've been having this tradition. So it's a really impressive tradition. And like I said, it gets its start in about 1915. So there was a local contractor named George Hartung who cut and transported that first tree, reportedly from a swamp near Larks Lake, into Harbor Springs. And it's talking about, this is a local newspaper in 1915, talking about the municipal Christmas tree. At the regular meeting of the village council acting on the suggestion of Reverend E.A. Beck, it was unanimously agreed to give the village's moral support to the idea of a municipal Christmas tree. And as you can see, they had a whole bunch of committees um, to carry this off. You can never get by without a good committee. And one of the people on that committee is Abby Shea. Abby is Abigail Shea. She is Ephraim Shea's granddaughter. Ephraim and his wife Jane had one son named Let, and Lett married a local girl named Catherine Rowe, and they had three daughters. And this is one of their daughters, Abigail. And several years later, I believe this is 1919, Abigail Shea dressed up as Mrs. Claus, and George Newark dressed up as Santa Claus, and they took one of their Carter cars and outlined it to look like a sled, and went down and to be part of that municipal Christmas tree celebration, to bring Santa downtown to deliver all of those um, nuts and candy and treats. Here's some images of the municipal Christmas tree from the 1920s and 30s. And, it's always been in that same location as well, which I think is really fantastic. We don't have a date for this image. I think it might be the 1930s, but it's showing them bringing the tree into Harbor Springs. Now, this is before they developed the really clever manhole Christmas tree stand method that they use today. And as you can see, they had to take a big chunk of earth with it so that it would stay in place. A little bit later here, this is 1961. This is Matthew's nursery getting ready to bring Christmas trees, a load of Christmas trees. Not just one big one, but you can see quite a few of them there. Here's some more fantastic images of Santa at the municipal Christmas tree in 1954. We have a whole series of images here, but Santa has been a regular part of the municipal Christmas tree since its founding in 1915. And so here he is. And we actually have in our collection one of those suits that Santa wore. So this is the costume that was worn by John Holliday, made by his wife Dorothy Holliday. There's 7 pieces to it, including the pants, a pair of gloves, and the fake beard, which when I first found it in our collection was very confusing to me until I saw the rest of the costume and the rest of the outfit. And so I thought I would include that. There's a little video on our YouTube page about this costume that you can take a look at if you'd like. And I can't mention Santa again without mentioning Ephraim Shea, or as they called him in 1914, 1915, Santa Shea. So in 1914, this is just 2 years before Ephraim Shea passes away, Shea added what I'm going to call another generous act to his long list of accomplishments. He was extremely well known as being sort of the community's grandfather. He was a grandfather to three little granddaughters, but really to the whole community. And in a newspaper reporting in 1914, it says, E. Shea has always been the friend of Harbor Springs boys and girls, but he has never made them quite so happy as he has this winter since he undertook the remarkable task of building bobsleds and cutters for all the girls and boys that should call at his office and ask for them. The article goes on to call Shea a veritable Saint Nicholas, and talks about his machine shop being transformed into a toy factory as he fills all of these orders. Basically, what happened is Ephraim Shea announced, if you would like to have a bobsled, come down to my office or to the machine shop and just put your name on a list. 460 sleds later, he was finally done. And that's a lot of sleds. But he made one for every child that requested one so that they would have a present for that holiday. In order to show their appreciation, in 1915, so about a year later, the next Christmas, a whole group of children gathered up and they each contributed 1 penny to the overall pot to buy Ephraim Shea a huge bouquet of flowers. And they proceeded down to his house in this little honorable parade and presented it to Ephraim Shea. And the newspaper talks about it and goes on about how they wanted to let him know how much they appreciated him. And when I found that newspaper article, I was more than a little bit thrilled because we had this image in our collection that said Grandfather Shea, 1915, flowers from children. And so I was able to put together that this is actually Shay with the flowers that those children gave him for building those sleds, which I thought was extremely special. We have three of Ephraim Shay's sleds in our collection here at the museum. They vary pretty widely in how they look um, over the years, but I imagine that they started out more complicated, and after 460, they got a little bit easier to make. And I'm going to end off with just a few more pictures of downtown, the municipal Christmas tree, because I love them and I thought I needed to share them with you. These are from photographer Bruce Gathman. So quite a bit more recently, 1980s or so, 1970s, 1980s. And that's what I have for you tonight. So I really hope you appreciated all of that history mixed with a lot of nostalgia and fun. I really had a great time researching this and finding those pictures and videos and putting it all together.